If you are reading this right now, it is necessary that you get out of your house immediately. I don't know how or why this is happening, but as far as I'm concerned, it's not safe for anyone to be reading this right now. Get in your car, get into the nearest town or city, and read it there, because I don't know how much longer it is until things come around you or anyone else. I don't know what this creature is, what it wants, or how many exist. All I know is that it is driven to kill, and it will stop at nothing to make sure it gets the job done. If you fail to follow these directions, at least lock all of your doors and windows, turn off the lights, stay somewhere safe, and make sure your presence is not known. Once you've done all that, continue reading this, and I'll explain what is happening to the best of my knowledge. One night, I was sitting at home watching TV. It was a rough week, so I was glad that the weekend had finally came. I could sit around doing nothing and not really care about anything. Everything seemed normal, or so I thought. But while I was watching TV, I noticed something odd. Coming out of the forest in my backyard was a man. Well, I'm not sure I could exactly call it that. It was about 5 feet tall, pale white, completely naked, and had very long arms. I mean, very long arms. They were dragging behind him like dead weight, and the way he walked almost made it seem like they were a burden to him. His hands were dragging a very large object behind him that I could not see at the time. As he took each step, I noticed he was walking with a very slumbering motion. Each step seemed to drain the very life out of him. I almost wanted to help it. That is, until I saw its face. As it got closer to me, I saw that where his eyes were supposed to be, there was nothing but 2 glowing red dots, resting in swollen sockets on his face. He had no nose, and he lacked lips as well. His mouth was stuck in a very wide grin, and his teeth were very large. That is to say, if they were teeth. They were more like nails protruding from the bleeding gums. It had very long, jet black hair that almost touched his waist. The thing paid no attention to me, dragging whatever it was carrying behind it as if it was an eternal duty. I could hear its soft panting, and saw fog coming from its mouth after each breath, due to the fact that it was the middle of winter. As he began to get closer to the house, I became more and more terrified. I quickly and silently shut off my TV and turned off my lights and hid in the bedroom upstairs. I looked out my window and continued to watch his actions. During this, the creature had now crossed my long backyard and made its way to my house. At this point, I was finally able to see the horrific object it was carrying. In his arms, he was dragging the body of a young man behind him. I couldn't tell what the person looked like. It was too mutilated and torn up for me to distinguish anything human about him. The creature then picked up the body and hung it against the wall with a meat hook, which was already pierced through the man's blood-drenched head. I nearly vomited at this sight. The creature walked backwards, stretching out its arms and letting out a subtle yawn. It was as if it had finally completed a very long task. It walked onto the back porch. It paced quickly after it had hung up the body. I waited in silence and terror, the only noise coming from my quickly beating heart pounding against my ribcage. Then it looked up at me, and its smile widened. I jumped back in horror. As it stepped closer to my back door, it reached out with its long arms and grabbed a hold of my doorknob. It slowly pushed open the back door and stepped inside. At this point, I was too stunned to do anything but lock my door and move to the corner of the room. I cowered under the blanket like a child and waited in fear. I knew what was next. I heard it climbing up my staircase, making a little noise as possible. When it reached the top of the staircase, it stopped for a moment, as if contemplating how to mutilate me. Then it grabbed a hold of the doorknob and began to shake it violently. It kept shaking the doorknob, hoping to break in, but to no avail. I heard the creature walk down the stairs and head out my back door. I watched the creature as it slowly sulked back into the forest. I waited for a few minutes, in case it came back with some kind of axe to chop down my door. I must have waited in a room for half an hour before I finally decided it was safe. I quickly ran down the stairs and out of my house. I got into my car and drove out as fast as I could. Wherever that creature was, I didn't want to be around when it came back. I went to the nearest town and rented a hotel. I stayed there for a night, and decided I would report the incident to the police in the morning. I was assured they would believe me, but it was better than getting framed for a murder I didn't commit. The next day, I got up and drove to the police station to report the murders to the police. Right as I entered the station, however, I noticed everything seemed to be too calm. There was no missing person report, no murder investigation taking place. It's as if the body I'd seen last night had never existed. I might as well have been in my imagination too, because when I returned home, the body wasn't there. In fact, there was no trace that anything last night had happened. It was as if it was a dream. Yeah, that had been it. It had been a dream. I probably just woken up frightened and ran out of my house in a panic. I kept telling myself these things, knowing in my heart they were not true. That night, I locked myself in my room and turned off my lights as soon as it got dark outside. I wanted to make sure the thing had no idea of my presence. Though it was hard to get sleep, I finally dozed off, only for a short time, as I was awoken around 1 a.m. to the sound of scratching. I sat right up in my bed and looked out the window, careful to stay hidden. To my horror, the creature was back, scratching against my wall. It was like it wanted to get my attention. When I looked at the wall, where it had placed the bodies last night, I saw 12 more in their place. Each one was hanging in a different gruesome way. 2 people hung upside down from barbed wire wrapped around their ankles. Others were nailed to the wall. One man was hanging from his intestines, which had been precisely removed from his body. I looked away from the terrible sight, waiting for the creature to put me against the wall with the rest of those people. It opened my back door and entered my house, this time quicker, as if it was more eager to add me to his collection. He climbed up the staircase and started to shake on my doorknob. He kept shaking it until it finally snapped and the door slid open. I watched as the monster silhouette silently crept through my door and knelt down next to me. At this point, I was too stunned to do anything, and I just sat there, waiting for my fate. It placed its hand on my chin and lifted my head up so it was forced to look into its empty eye sockets. I felt its warm breath against my face, which smelled of blood, and then to my surprise, it spoke. "Father?" It spoke with a low, raspy voice. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This creature was calling me its father, speaking almost like a child saying his first words. I've never had a son, and I know I would have had a son if it looked at me like this. It almost looked sad while it spoke. "Father? Are you scared, Father? Why are you scared, Father?" I kept looking at the creature in horror. What the heck was going on? Did this thing really think I was its father? I sat there in awe and shock at the horrible thing. "Father, look outside." It took long breaths between each word, as if it was struggling. "I made a gift for you. Do you like it?" I forced myself to look out the window, at the horrific artwork the beast laid out for me to see. The thing looked at me for a moment, as if I contemplated an answer. In a shaky voice, I said, "Yes, I really love your gift." Its smile grew with excitement. I put my head down and watched it slowly leave the room. I sighed with relief and moved away from the doorway. Just as I did, however, the creature turned around and looked at me and said something that still to this moment caused me to fear for my life and everyone else's lives. Its final words to me are the reason I'm still getting the message out to you, everyone. As he crept out the door for the last time, he said, "I'm not done yet, Father. Stay here. I'm gonna get even more people." He still hasn't returned yet.